At 28 and widowed, Patty Clayson had accepted her fate until the notorious Dark Duke entered London's most exclusive matchmaking assembly, walked past every fresh debutante, and pointed directly at her in the shadows, his single word shattering the silence. You. The chandeliers of Thornfield House blazed with 1,000 candles, casting London's most eligible bachelors and freshest debutantes in golden light, while 28-year-old Patty Clayson stood in the shadows near the terrace doors, counting the minutes until this humiliation would end. 3 years widowed, marked by scandal she hadn't caused, and impossibly American in a room full of English roses barely past 17, she had agreed to attend Lady Thornfield's matchmaking assembly only to appease her dying aunt's final wish. Her black mourning dress had been replaced by a borrowed lavender gown, the color of half-mourning that marked her as neither maiden nor fully available, and she watched with practiced detachment as gentleman after gentleman claimed the hands of giggling girls young enough to be taught rather than courted. This was her last night in London society before the ship back to Philadelphia sailed in a fortnight, and Patty had already made peace with returning to America alone, to the quiet respectability of spinsterhood and the teaching position waiting for her in her late husband's family's school. Then the ballroom doors opened with such force that conversation stuttered and died, and the Dark Duke of Ashworth entered like a storm, given human form.
Hello everyone! Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, like the video and share with loved ones, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. That way YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin.
The chandeliers of Thornfield House blazed with 1,000 candles, casting London's most eligible bachelors and freshest debutantes in golden light, while 28-year-old Patty Clayson stood in the shadows near the terrace doors, counting the minutes until this humiliation would end. 3 years widowed, marked by scandal she hadn't caused, and impossibly American in a room full of English roses barely past 17, she had agreed to attend Lady Thornfield's matchmaking assembly only to appease her dying aunt's final wish. "You must try, Patricia," Aunt Cordelia had insisted from her sickbed in their rented townhouse on Berkeley Square. "One last chance before you sail home to that dreary teaching position." Now, watching gentleman after gentleman claim the hands of giggling girls young enough to be taught rather than courted, Patty regretted her promise. Her black mourning dress had been replaced by a borrowed lavender gown, the color of half-mourning that marked her as neither maiden nor fully available. She might as well have worn a sign declaring her unsuitability. "Did you hear about the Duke of Ashworth?" A young voice nearby caught her attention. 2 debutantes, neither past 19, huddled together in excited whispers. Lady Thornfield invited him personally, though everyone says he never attends these gatherings. "The Dark Duke," her companion breathed dramatically. "They say he hasn't courted anyone since his wife died in childbirth 5 years ago. Imagine if he actually came tonight." Patty turned away, uncomfortable eavesdropping on their romantic fantasies. She had her own ghosts to contend with without borrowing others' tragic tales. The clock struck 9, then past. The dancing had begun in earnest, the string quartet filling the ballroom with lilting melodies. Patty calculated she could reasonably depart by 10 without offending Lady Thornfield too greatly, just 30 more minutes of invisibility. Then the ballroom doors burst open with such force that conversation stuttered and died. A man entered like a storm, given human form, tall and dark-haired, his riding clothes betraying his late arrival from somewhere beyond London's civilized boundaries. Even from across the room, Patty could see the tension in his shoulders, the barely contained energy that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. Lord Payne, Lady Thornfield's voice carried across the sudden silence, disapproval sharp as cut glass. How unexpected. My apologies, Lady Thornfield, he replied, his voice deep and unhurried despite his tardiness. Estate matters required attention. The whispers began immediately. That's him, the Dark Duke. Lord Darren Payne himself. 5 years since the tragedy. Never thought he'd actually come. Patty watched as Lady Thornfield gestured toward the line of debutantes arranged like flowers in a garden, each one bright with anticipation. Surely he would choose one of them, make some widow's evening complete by selecting her daughter for the distinction of dancing with a duke. But Lord Payne's gaze swept past the debutantes as if they were merely furniture. His grey eyes, the colour of Yorkshire storms, moved methodically across the ballroom until they found the shadows where Patty stood. Their eyes locked, and Patty felt something shift in her chest, a recognition she couldn't name. He moved toward her with purposeful strides, ignoring Lady Thornfield's attempt to redirect him toward the assembled young ladies. The crowd parted, confusion rippling through the assembly like wind across water. He stopped directly before Patty, removing his gloves with deliberate precision. Up close, she could see the silver beginning at his temples, the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of grief, weathered rather than time, merely past. "Madam," he said, extending his hand with absolute certainty, "would you grant me the honor of the first waltz?" The ballroom held its breath. Patty's voice emerged steadier than she felt. "I would be honored, Lord Payne." His hand closed around hers, warm and strong, and led her onto the floor as London society erupted in scandalized whispers behind them. The morning after the assembly, Patty woke convinced she had dreamed the entire evening. No duke walked past fresh debutantes to dance with an aging American widow. No man held her gaze throughout an entire waltz, as if she were the only person in the room. No gentleman publicly requested permission to call upon her before departing into the London night. Then the flowers arrived. 47 bouquets, Miss Patty, the housekeeper announced, bewildered. They filled the entire parlor and half the entrance hall. Aunt Cordelia laughed from her bed, the sound papery but delighted. "Well, my dear, it appears you've caused quite a sensation." The card was simple, written in bold, decisive script. "Thank you for the dance. May I call upon you this afternoon? D.P." He arrived at precisely 3 o'clock, carrying not more flowers, but a leather-bound volume. "You mentioned during our waltz that you missed the libraries of Philadelphia," Lord Payne said, as Aunt Cordelia's maid served tea in the small parlor. "I thought you might appreciate this. It's a collection of American poetry I acquired some years ago." Patty opened the book with trembling fingers, finding works by Philip Freneau and Phyllis Wheatley. "You remembered." "I remember everything you said." His grey eyes held hers, with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You spoke of teaching, of books, of how London feels both grand and suffocating compared to Philadelphia's ordered streets." They talked for an hour under Aunt Cordelia's watchful but approving eye. When he left, he asked, "Might I call again tomorrow? Perhaps a walk in Hyde Park, properly chaperoned?" "Of course." "I would like that," Patty replied, and meant it more than she had meant anything in 3 years. The next afternoon, as they walked beneath the autumn trees of Hyde Park with Aunt Cordelia's maid trailing at a respectful distance, Lord Payne told her about Blackthorn Hall. "It's in Yorkshire, near Harrogate. Gothic, imposing, perhaps too large for one man, but the land is good, the tenants loyal. You sound lonely there, Patty observed. He stopped walking, turning to face her. I am. I have been for a very long time. Before she could respond, a voice interrupted them. Darren, what a surprise to find you in London. The man approaching was perhaps 30, handsome, in a polished way that contrasted sharply with Lord Payne's rougher edges, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. Victor, Lord Payne's tone cooled noticeably. Allow me to introduce Miss Patricia Clayson of Philadelphia. Patty, this is my cousin, Victor Harold's. The American widow from the Assembly, Victor said, his assessment of her barely concealed. How fascinating that you've captured my cousin's attention. He so rarely ventures into society anymore. Miss Clayson's company is worth venturing for, Lord Payne said firmly. After Victor departed with barely concealed displeasure, Patty asked, He doesn't approve of me. Victor is my heir presumptive, having no children of my own. He's grown comfortable with the expectation of inheriting. Lord Payne's jaw tightened. My choices are not his concern. That evening, as Patty prepared for bed, a note was delivered. Victor's handwriting was elegant, his message clear. Dear Miss Clayson, forgive my directness, but I feel compelled to warn you. My cousin is a fragile man, still grieving his late wife. I would hate to see him taken advantage of by someone seeking to improve her circumstances. A true friend would leave him in peace. Yours in concern, V.H. Patty crushed the note in her fist, anger and shame burning in equal measure. Was that what London society thought? That she was a fortune hunter, preying on a grieving duke? But when Lord Payne arrived the next morning to take her to his favorite bookshop in Piccadilly, the way his face lit up when she entered the room made Victor's words feel like distant thunder, threatening but not yet arrived. The letter arrived on the 5th day of Lord Payne's courtship, delivered by a liveried footman bearing the Ashworth crest. Patty's hands shook as she broke the seal. Miss Clayson, I require your presence at Ashworth House tomorrow at 2 o'clock. There are matters we must discuss regarding my brother, Jenna Payne. His sister, Aunt Cordelia said from her chair, her breathing more labored than yesterday. I've heard she's been his protector since Catherine's death, fierce as a mother wolf. The next afternoon, Patty stood before the imposing facade of Ashworth House in Mayfair, its white stone and perfect symmetry speaking of wealth accumulated over generations, a far cry from her modest upbringing in Philadelphia's merchant district. A butler led her to a drawing room where a woman sat by the window, her profile sharp against the afternoon light. She was perhaps 32, beautiful in a severe way, dressed in widow's black. Miss Clayson. Jenna Payne didn't rise or offer her hand. Please sit. Patty obeyed, acutely aware of being assessed like horseflesh at auction. My brother has been alone for 5 years, Jenna began without preamble. In that time, he's refused every introduction, declined every invitation, ignored every scheming mother in England. Then you appear, and within a week, he's calling daily, smiling again, talking of the future. Her green eyes, so like her brother's grey ones, fixed on Patty with laser precision. Why? I don't know, Patty answered honestly. I was as surprised as anyone. Were you? Jenna's tone sharpened. An American widow of modest means, past her prime, suddenly catching the eye of a wealthy duke? Some might call that convenient. Heat flooded Patty's cheeks. Some already have. Your cousin Victor made his opinions quite clear. Victor is a snake, but even snakes occasionally speak truth. Jenna leaned forward. Tell me about your husband's death. The demand struck like a physical blow. "I beg your pardon? Your first husband, Thomas Clayson. He died 3 years ago, under circumstances some found suspicious. I've made inquiries." Patty stood abruptly, her composure cracking. "Then you know he died of consumption, that I nursed him for 8 months while his family stood by and blamed me for bringing American weakness into their bloodline, that after he died, they suggested I had hastened his end to claim his modest life insurance. And did you?" The question was cruel, calculated. "No." Patty's voice broke. "But I couldn't save him either. Just as I couldn't save our daughter Sarah, who died 3 months before him at 6 months old. I watched them both slip away while everyone whispered that I wasn't enough, didn't do enough, wasn't the right kind of wife or mother." Tears streamed down her face now. 3 years of suppressed grief pouring out before this hostile stranger. "So if you've brought me here to tell me I'm not good enough for your brother, you're too late. I already know. Everyone has made certain I know." She moved toward the door, but Jenna's voice stopped her. "Wait." Turning back, Patty saw tears on Jenna's face as well. "My husband died 4 years ago," Jenna whispered. "Hunting accident. Everyone said I should have stopped him from riding that day, that I should have known the weather was too poor, as if I could control fate itself." She stood, crossing to Patty. "I lost my daughter too, stillborn, 2 years before I lost him. So I understand that particular hell." The two women stared at each other, grief recognizing grief. "I'm sorry," Jenna said, her voice breaking. "I'm so terribly sorry. I was trying to protect him, but I see now, you understand what he survived. You won't break him because you're already broken in the same places." Will Jenna become Patty's greatest ally or her worst enemy? Subscribe to discover how their fragile alliance shapes everything that comes next. Because what happens at Blackthorn Hall will change both their lives forever. The journey north took 3 days by private carriage, Lord Payne having insisted on every comfort for Patty's first visit to Yorkshire. Jenna accompanied them, her presence transforming from interrogator to unexpected friend as the miles passed beneath their wheels. "Darren doesn't bring people to Blackthorn," Jenna confided on the second evening at a coaching inn near Nottingham. "Not since Catherine. You should know what that means." When they finally crested the hill overlooking the Payne estate, Patty understood why it was called Blackthorn Hall. The stone mansion rose dark against the Yorkshire sky, Gothic and imposing, surrounded by windswept moors that stretched toward distant peaks, beautiful and lonely in equal measure. "It's magnificent," Patty breathed. "It's haunted," Jenna corrected quietly. "Not by ghosts, but by memories. Perhaps you can help lay them to rest." The interior proved her right. Though impeccably maintained, the house felt frozen in time, as if waiting for someone to breathe life back into its rooms. Darren showed her through with visible pride mixed with sadness, pointing out the library with its floor-to-ceiling shelves, the music room where his mother once played, the nursery that hadn't been opened in 5 years. At dinner that evening, Patty met Jenna's daughter, 8-year-old Claire, a serious child with her mother's sharp intelligence. The girl studied Patty throughout the meal before finally announcing, "You're prettier than the ladies from London who came before, but Uncle Darren sent them all away." "Claire," Jenna admonished, but Darren laughed, the sound filling the cavernous dining room with unexpected warmth. "Your niece speaks the truth," he said, his eyes on Patty. "I did send them away. They saw only the title and the estate, never the man." "And what does Miss Clayson see?" Jenna asked pointedly. Patty considered carefully before answering. I see a man who built something beautiful, but can't quite remember why. A man who reads poetry during blizzards and remembers conversations about Philadelphia libraries. A man brave enough to choose differently than expected. The silence that followed was broken by Claire. I like her, Uncle Darren. She uses proper words. The next morning, Darren took Patty riding across the estate. They visited tenant farms where families greeted their lord with genuine warmth, not servile fear. They rode through meadows dotted with sheep, past streams cutting through rocky hillsides until they reached a cliff overlooking a valley painted in autumn colors. Ancient ruins stood there, stones worn smooth by centuries of Yorkshire weather. "This is my favorite place," Darren said, helping her dismount. "What remains of an old monastery? I come here when I need to think clearly." They walked among the stones, their footsteps echoing off weathered walls. Finally, at what had once been an altar, Darren stopped. "I proposed to Catherine here," he said quietly. 10 years ago, when everything seemed possible. We married, moved into Blackthorn, planned our life together." His voice roughened. "She died in the nursery 18 months later, our son dying with her. I haven't been able to enter that room since." Patty reached for his hand, squeezing gently. "My daughter Sarah died in my arms. One moment she was breathing, and the next she simply wasn't." Thomas blamed himself, though the doctor said it was nothing we could have prevented. He started coughing blood 3 months later. "How do you bear it?" Darren asked, his grey eyes searching hers. "The weight of losing them both?" "Badly," Patty admitted. "I ran across an ocean thinking distance would help. It didn't. The grief followed me to every bride gathering, every pitying glance, every whisper about the unlucky American widow." Darren pulled her closer, his arms coming around her in the shadow of ancient stones. "Perhaps," he said against her hair, "we're meant to carry it together, make the weight bearable by sharing it." Before Patty could respond, hoofbeats echoed across the valley. A rider approached at speed, and even from a distance, Patty recognized Victor Harold's elegant posture. "He shouldn't be here," Darren muttered darkly. "I didn't invite him." Victor dismounted with practiced grace, his smile sharp as he approached the ruins. "Darren, how delightful to find you here. And Miss Clayson, what a surprise to see you so far from London." "What do you want, Victor?" Darren's arm remained protectively around Patty's waist. "Merely to check on my dear cousin. When I heard you'd brought a guest to Blackthorn, I felt compelled to ensure all was well." Victor's gaze swept over Patty with thinly veiled contempt. "Family duty, you understand. Your concern is noted and unwelcome," Darren replied coldly. "You may leave." In a moment, Victor produced a folded document from his coat. "But first, Miss Clayson and I should have a private word about certain allegations that have surfaced regarding her late husband's rather convenient death." Patty felt the blood drain from her face. Those accusations were investigated and dismissed. In Philadelphia, perhaps, but English society operates differently. Such scandal attached to the Duchess of Ashworth would be unfortunate. Victor's smile widened. Unless, of course, Miss Clayson chose to return to America before such unpleasantness became public. "You bastard!" Darren stepped forward, fury radiating from every line of his body. "You manufactured this." "I'm protecting the family name," Victor countered smoothly, "something you seem to have forgotten in your desperate loneliness." "Get off my land," Darren's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Now." "Oh, I'll leave, but not alone." Victor turned to Patty. "You have until tomorrow to depart quietly, Miss Clayson. Otherwise, I'll include every drawing room in London knows about the poisoning allegations. Your brother's reputation will survive. Yours won't." He mounted and rode off, leaving silence heavy as stone between them. "Patty," Darren began, but she pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself. "He's right. The scandal will destroy any chance you have of moving forward. I should go." "No." The word came fierce and absolute. "I won't let him manipulate us with lies and fear." "They're not entirely lies," Patty whispered. "The allegations existed. My husband's family did suspect me, even if they couldn't prove anything because there was nothing to prove. But the whispers followed me, Darren. They always will." "Then let them whisper." He caught her hands, pulling her to face him. "Patty, these past weeks with you have been the first time in 5 years I've felt truly alive. You understand loss in a way no one else can. You see Blackthorn's potential, not just its ghosts. You make me believe in futures again, not just surviving day to day, but your reputation is mine to risk." He drew her closer to the ancient altar, where he'd once promised forever to another woman. "I've spent 5 years being careful, being proper, being the grieving duke everyone expected. I'm done with that. I'm done with letting fear and other people's judgments dictate my choices." Tears streamed down Patty's face. "You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you're brave enough to keep trying after repeated rejection. I know you're kind to my sister despite her testing you. I know you read poetry and love learning and aren't intimidated by Gothic mansions or stubborn dukes." His voice softened. "And I know that taking your hand at that assembly was the first right choice I've made in years." He knelt before her on the ancient stones, still holding her hands. "Marry me, Patty, not despite our grief, but because of it. Because we understand what partnership truly costs and are willing to pay it anyway. Because I'd rather face scandal with you than spend another year in respectable loneliness." "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." As he rose to kiss her, neither noticed the figures watching from the valley below. Victor, with 3 prominent members of Yorkshire society, witnesses to what he'd planned as Patty's humiliation. Instead, he'd witnessed his own defeat. Victor's face paled as Darren spotted the gathered witnesses and strode purposefully down the hillside, Patty's hand firmly in his. "Gentlemen," Darren addressed Lord Pemberton, Sir Richard Talbot, and Magistrate Lord Hastings. "I assume my cousin invited you here for some spectacle. Allow me to provide a different one." He raised Patty's hand high. "Miss Patricia Clayson has just accepted my proposal of marriage. I trust you'll join us in celebrating when we announce it properly in London." Lord Hastings, a sharp-eyed man in his 40s, studied Victor with interest. "Harold's, you suggested we'd witness quite a different scene. Something about scandal and American fortune hunters?" "I merely expressed concern for my cousin's judgment," Victor stammered. "No," Darren's voice cut like steel. "You attempted blackmail and character assassination. Miss Clayson's late husband died of consumption, documented by 3 physicians. Her infant daughter died of natural causes, witnessed by midwife and doctor. Yet you've spread poisonous rumors suggesting otherwise." "I'll investigate these allegations," Lord Hastings said coldly, his gaze fixed on Victor. "All of them, including who started them and why." Victor mounted his horse without another word, riding off in humiliated fury as the 3 gentlemen offered genuine congratulations to the newly engaged couple. They returned to London a week later to find Aunt Cordelia declining rapidly. The old woman's face lit up when Patty showed her the ring, Darren's mother's sapphire, reset to fit her finger. "I knew that Duke had sense," Cordelia whispered. "Don't let anyone make you doubt yourself, child. You've earned this happiness." She died peacefully 3 nights later, leaving Patty grieving but grateful she'd witnessed the engagement. Darren arranged a beautiful funeral and stood steadfast beside Patty through her tears. "She was the last connection to my parents," Patty said as they left the cemetery. "Now I truly am alone in the world." "You have me," Darren replied firmly, "and Jenna and Claire, and soon all of Blackthorn. You're not alone anymore." Wedding preparations began immediately, set for St. George's Chapel in 6 weeks. Jenna threw herself into planning with unexpected enthusiasm, becoming the sister Patty had never had. Together they chose flowers, negotiated with dressmakers, and managed the endless social calls from curious members of the ton. The gossip was relentless. An American widow, past 30, no connections. How did she capture the Dark Duke? But Darren faced each whisper with Patty on his arm, making clear his choice was deliberate and celebrated. Then Victor's silence became ominous. "He's planning something," Jenna warned 3 weeks before the wedding. "Victor doesn't accept defeat gracefully." "Let him plan," Darren said, though Patty noticed his tension increasing as the wedding approached. Lord Hastings visited their townhouse a fortnight before the ceremony. "I've investigated thoroughly," he told them in Darren's study. "The allegations against Miss Clayson are completely unfounded. However, I've also discovered Victor has been making inquiries, hiring investigators in Philadelphia, speaking with your late husband's family." "To what end?" Patty asked, though dread already filled her stomach. "To manufacture evidence where none exists. He's desperate." Hastings's expression grew grave. "Watch him carefully. Desperate men do dangerous things." The final dress fitting was interrupted by a note delivered by a street urchin. Patty opened it with shaking hands. "Your past isn't as buried as you think. See you at the altar if you dare show your face. VH." Darren crushed the note in his fist. "He's bluffing. We have truth on our side." "Do we?" Patty whispered, staring at her reflection in the mirror, the white wedding gown suddenly feeling like a costume. "What if he's found something I don't even know about? What if Thomas's family—" "Then we face it together," Darren interrupted, turning her to face him. "Whatever he brings, whatever lies he's constructed, we face them together. I won't let him destroy this." But as Patty looked into his determined grey eyes, she wondered if love and truth would be enough against Victor's calculated malice. If you believe in justice and fairness, subscribe to this channel, because what happens at that altar will test everything Patty and Darren have fought for, and you won't want to miss how they fight back against the darkness closing in. St. George's Chapel in Hanover Square gleamed with morning light streaming through stained glass windows, painting the assembled guests in jeweled colors. Every pew was filled with London society, curiosity, and scandal hunger, drawing them like moths to flame. At the altar, Darren stood tall in his black formal coat, Lord Hastings beside him as best man, both scanning the crowd with barely concealed vigilance. In the vestibule, Patty adjusted her veil with trembling fingers. The white silk gown Jenna had insisted on hung perfectly, but Patty felt like an imposter playing bride. Jenna squeezed her hand. "You look beautiful. And Darren looks like a man who's found his way home." "What if Victor—" "Then we handle it," Jenna said firmly. "Together." The organs swelled, signaling the processional. Patty took a deep breath, preparing to walk alone down the aisle, having no father or uncle to give her away. She had taken only 3 steps when the chapel doors burst open behind her. "Stop this wedding," Victor's voice rang through the sacred space. "I have evidence that must be heard before this travesty proceeds." Gasps rippled through the congregation. Darren moved toward the aisle, fury darkening his features, but Patty raised her hand, stopping him. If Victor wanted a public spectacle, she wouldn't cower. "Speak then," she said, her voice carrying clearly. "Let everyone hear what you've constructed." Victor strode forward, brandishing documents. Letters from Philadelphia, from the Clayson family. They detail how Patricia Clayson systematically poisoned her husband Thomas with arsenic-laced medicines, hastening his death to claim his life insurance. $5,000, a fortune for a mere schoolteacher. The chapel erupted in shocked murmurs. Several ladies fanned themselves dramatically. Patty felt the world tilt, but forced herself to remain standing. "These are signed testimonies," Victor continued triumphantly, "from Thomas Clayson's brother and mother, swearing to their suspicions. They also state that the infant Sarah died under similarly suspicious circumstances." "Enough!" Lord Hastings' voice cut through the chaos like a blade. He descended from the altar, his magistrate's authority silencing the crowd. "Mr. Harold's, may I examine these documents?" Victor handed them over confidently. Hastings studied them for a long moment, then looked up with cold fury. "These are forgeries." "Impossible," Victor sputtered. "I had them directly from a man named Bernard Wicks in Southwark," Hastings interrupted, "a known forger whom I arrested yesterday after tracking your payments to him. He's already confessed to creating these documents at your instruction using real Clayson family letterhead you provided." He held up the papers. "The ink is wrong. The date format inconsistent with American correspondence. And, most damning, Thomas Clayson's brother, referenced here, died 2 years before Thomas himself. Rather difficult for a dead man to provide testimony." The congregation's shock redirected toward Victor, whose face drained of color. "Furthermore," Hastings continued, producing his own documents, "I have genuine statements from Philadelphia physicians and Thomas Clayson's surviving family members. They confirm Thomas died of consumption, his daughter of natural causes, and that Patricia Clayson nursed both with devoted care. The only suspicion came from distant relatives hoping to contest the will, claims that were legally dismissed." "This is absurd," Victor tried desperately. "Why would I—" "Because you're the heir presumptive." Darren's voice was deadly quiet as he approached. "Because my marrying and potentially having children threatens your inheritance. Because you're willing to destroy an innocent woman to secure your future." Lord Hastings signaled to 2 constables waiting by the doors. "Victor Harold's, I'm arresting you for fraud, defamation, and attempted extortion." As the constables moved forward, Victor's composure shattered. "You're throwing away the dukedom for a common American nobody. She's nothing, Darren. Nothing." "She's everything," Darren replied simply. Silence fell as Victor was escorted out, his protests fading into the London street. The minister cleared his throat awkwardly. "Shall we continue?" Darren turned to Patty, his hand extended. "The choice is yours. We can postpone, let the scandal settle." Patty didn't let him finish. She walked down the aisle with her head high, each step deliberate, claiming her future before 300 witnesses. When she reached Darren, she took his hand firmly. "I choose this. I choose you. I choose us." The smile that broke across his face was worth every humiliation, every whisper, every year of loneliness that had led to this moment. St. George's Chapel in Hanover Square gleamed with morning light streaming through stained glass windows, painting the assembled guests in jeweled colors. Every pew was filled with London society, curiosity, and scandal hunger, drawing them like moths to flame. At the altar, Darren stood tall in his black formal coat, Lord Hastings beside him as best man, both scanning the crowd with barely concealed vigilance. In the vestibule, Patty adjusted her veil with trembling fingers. The white silk gown Jenna had insisted on hung perfectly, but Patty felt like an imposter playing bride. Jenna squeezed her hand. "You look beautiful, and Darren looks like a man who's found his way home." "What if Victor?" "Then we handle it," Jenna said firmly. "Together." The organs swelled, signaling the processional. Patty took a deep breath, preparing to walk alone down the aisle, having no father or uncle to give her away. She had taken only 3 steps when the chapel doors burst open behind her. "Stop this wedding," Victor's voice rang through the sacred space. "I have evidence that must be heard before this travesty proceeds." Gasps rippled through the congregation. Darren moved toward the aisle, fury darkening his features, but Patty raised her hand, stopping him. If Victor wanted a public spectacle, she wouldn't cower. "Speak then," she said, her voice carrying clearly. "Let everyone hear what you've constructed." Victor strode forward, brandishing documents. Letters from Philadelphia, from the Clayson family. They detail how Patricia Clayson systematically poisoned her husband Thomas with arsenic-laced medicines, hastening his death to claim his life insurance. $5,000, a fortune for a mere schoolteacher. The chapel erupted in shocked murmurs. Several ladies fanned themselves dramatically. Patty felt the world tilt, but forced herself to remain standing. "These are signed testimonies," Victor continued triumphantly, "from Thomas Clayson's brother and mother, swearing to their suspicions. They also state that the infant Sarah died under similarly suspicious circumstances." "Enough!" Lord Hastings's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. He descended from the altar, his magistrate's authority silencing the crowd. "Mr. Harolds, may I examine these documents?" Victor handed them over confidently. Hastings studied them for a long moment, then looked up with cold fury. "These are forgeries." "Impossible," Victor sputtered. "I had them directly from a man named Bernard Wicks in Southwark," Hastings interrupted. "A known forger whom I arrested yesterday after tracking your payments to him. He's already confessed to creating these documents at your instruction, using real Clayson family letterhead you provided." He held up the papers. "The ink is wrong, the date format inconsistent with American correspondence, and most damning, Thomas Clayson's brother, referenced here, died 2 years before Thomas himself. Rather difficult for a dead man to provide testimony." The congregation's shock redirected toward Victor, whose face drained of color. "Furthermore," Hastings continued, producing his own documents, "I have genuine statements from Philadelphia physicians and Thomas Clayson's surviving family members. They confirm Thomas died of consumption, his daughter of natural causes, and that Patricia Clayson nursed both with devoted care. The only suspicion came from distant relatives hoping to contest the will, claims that were legally dismissed." "This is absurd," Victor tried desperately. "Why would I—" "Because you're the heir presumptive." Darren's voice was deadly quiet as he approached. "Because my marrying and potentially having children threatens your inheritance. Because you're willing to destroy an innocent woman to secure your future." Lord Hastings signaled to 2 constables waiting by the doors. "Victor Harolds, I'm arresting you for fraud, defamation, and attempted extortion." As the constables moved forward, Victor's composure shattered. "You're throwing away the dukedom for a common American nobody." "She's nothing, Darren. Nothing." "She's everything," Darren replied simply. Silence fell as Victor was escorted out, his protests fading into the London street. The minister cleared his throat awkwardly. "Shall we continue?" Darren turned to Patty, his hand extended. "The choice is yours. We can postpone. Let the scandal settle." Patty didn't let him finish. She walked down the aisle with her head high, each step deliberate, claiming her future before 300 witnesses. When she reached Darren, she took his hand firmly. "I choose this. I choose you. I choose us." The smile that broke across his face was worth every humiliation, every whisper, every year of loneliness that had led to this moment. 18 months after their wedding, Patty stood at the window of their Philadelphia estate, watching spring rain wash over the gardens. The journey from London had taken 6 weeks by ship, Darren insisting they travel early to ensure she'd have the best medical care available for the birth. "You're certain about this?" he'd asked before they left Blackthorn, his hand on her still flat stomach. "Returning to Philadelphia, where I have history, yes," Patty had interrupted gently, "but also where the doctors are excellent, where modern techniques might make the difference. I need every advantage, Darren. We both do." Now 8 months pregnant and enormous, Patty felt the familiar flutter of fear that had haunted her since confirming the pregnancy. Sarah had been so tiny, so fragile. What if this child— "Stop," Darren said from the doorway, reading her expression as he always could. He crossed to wrap his arms around her from behind, his hands covering hers on her swollen belly. "Dr. Morrison says everything is progressing perfectly. You're healthy, strong. This isn't the same. You don't know that." "No," he admitted against her hair, "but I have to believe it. We both do." Life at Blackthorn had transformed them both. Patty had gradually opened the closed rooms, including the nursery, redecorating with Jenna's help. The house had filled with warmth, fires in every grate, flowers in every room, and most importantly, Claire's laughter as she adopted Patty as a second mother. "Aunt Patty, will the baby like books?" Claire had asked one snowy evening, the three of them reading in the library while a blizzard raged outside. "I certainly hope so," Patty had replied, exchanging a smile with Darren over the child's head. They'd split their time between Yorkshire and Philadelphia, purchasing a modest but comfortable estate near Patty's childhood home. Darren had been fascinated by America's energy, its lack of rigid class structure, though he maintained his English estates with equal dedication. The labor began at dawn 3 days later. Dr. Morrison arrived quickly, bringing a nurse trained in the latest techniques. Darren refused to leave, ignoring propriety, holding Patty's hand through each contraction. "I won't lose you," he said fiercely, as she screamed through a particularly brutal wave. "Do you hear me? I won't lose either of you." 8 hours later, their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that echoed through the house. Dr. Morrison placed the squalling infant in Patty's arms, and for a moment she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare at the perfect face, the tiny fists waving indignantly. "She's breathing," Patty whispered. "She's alive, she's—" Then the tears came. 3 years of terror and grief pouring out as she held her living daughter. Darren collapsed beside the bed, his own face wet, his hand trembling as he touched the baby's dark hair. "We did it," he said brokenly. "God, Patty, we survived it." But the healing wasn't complete until that night, when the baby slept peacefully in her cradle and Darren finally broke. Patty woke to find him sobbing silently, staring at their daughter. "I was so afraid," he confessed when she touched his shoulder. "Every day of your pregnancy, I was terrified of walking into a room and finding you gone, like Catherine. Finding our child," his voice fractured. "I couldn't have survived, losing you both." Patty pulled him close, letting him weep against her shoulder. "But we're here, we're alive. We made it through the fear together." "Together," he repeated, the word a vow. They named her Margaret, called her Maggie from the start. She had Darren's grey eyes and Patty's determined spirit, evident from her first powerful protests when hungry. 2 years later, twin boys arrived. Thomas and Catherine, named for the loves they'd lost but never forgotten. The Philadelphia house filled with noise and joy, while Blackthorn Hall awaited their regular returns, Claire growing into a lovely young woman who adored her younger cousins. "Do you miss teaching?" Darren asked one evening as they watched their children play in Yorkshire's summer twilight. "I am teaching," Patty replied, gesturing to where Claire read to the twins while Maggie built elaborate towers from wooden blocks. "Just differently than I imagined." 10 years later, Blackthorn Hall blazed with light for the first time in decades. The annual summer ball had become tradition, drawing society from London and curious Americans making the grand tour. Patty, now 38, moved through the ballroom with practiced grace, her burgundy silk gown catching candlelight. 3 children trailed in her wake. Maggie at 10, already showing signs of becoming a formidable woman, and the 7-year-old twins creating cheerful chaos wherever they went. "Mama, Thomas put a frog in Lady Hastings' reticule," Catherine reported with the solemnity of a prosecution witness. "Did he?" Patty suppressed a smile. "Your father will handle it." She scanned the room, finding Darren, cornering their son with that particular expression that meant a lecture about proper behavior. At 41, he'd grown more distinguished, silver threading through his dark hair, but his eyes still found hers across any crowded room with the same intensity as that first assembly. Her gaze drifted to the shadows near the terrace doors, where a woman stood alone, perhaps 27 or 28, wearing a dated gown that had been altered to fit current fashion. She held herself with quiet dignity, but her eyes betrayed loneliness as she watched the dancers. Patty knew that posture. She'd worn it herself once. "Wait here," she told Catherine, then crossed the ballroom with purpose. "Good evening," Patty said warmly. "I'm Patricia Payne. I don't believe we've been introduced?" The woman startled. "Oh, Lady Darren, forgive me. I'm Miss Eleanor Hartwell. I shouldn't be lurking in corners, but I'm companion to Lady Thornfield, and she insisted I attend tonight." "Lady Thornfield has excellent instincts." Patty gestured to the doors. "Would you walk with me? It's stifling in here." On the terrace, away from scrutiny, Eleanor relaxed slightly. "You're American. Born in Philadelphia. Does that shock you?" "No, it gives me hope." Eleanor smiled sadly. "I'm 30 next month, past consideration for most gentlemen." "I was 28 when I met my husband," Patty said quietly. "A widow, an outsider. Everyone assumed I was invisible, but you weren't." "No." Patty looked through the windows at Darren, now dancing with Maggie, both laughing. "Someone saw me when others looked past. Changed everything." A young man emerged onto the terrace. James, Victor's son, raised by them after his father's death. He'd inherited none of Victor's bitterness, only his sharp features and sharper mind. "Aunt Patty, Papa says—" He stopped, noticing Eleanor. "Forgive the interruption." "Not at all. James Payne, may I present Miss Eleanor Hartwell?" Patty watched recognition spark between them, saw Eleanor blush when James bowed over her hand with genuine admiration rather than mere politeness. "Would you honor me with a dance, Miss Hartwell?" James asked. As they returned inside, Patty felt Darren's arms circle her waist from behind, exactly as he had in Philadelphia. Playing matchmaker, he murmured, paying forward a kindness once shown to me. They stood together, watching their children, their nephew, the life they'd built from grief and courage. Inside, James waltzed with Eleanor, drawing her from the shadows into the light. "Do you ever regret it?" Darren asked. "The scandal? The struggle? Splitting your life between two continents?" "Never." Patty turned in his arms. Being too old meant I was exactly the right age, wise enough to recognize what mattered. "Dance with me?" He extended his hand as he had 13 years ago. Patty took it without hesitation, letting him lead her back into the ballroom, into the life they'd chosen despite every obstacle. Behind them, Eleanor laughed at something James said, and Patty smiled. The grace of being seen continues forward, one brave choice at a time. If Patty and Darren's journey moved you, subscribe for more stories about finding love on your own terms, because sometimes being too old means you're exactly the right age for something extraordinary.
If you enjoyed this story, we appreciate you a whole lot and look forward to connecting with you as we build a community on this channel. Every day, we will put out more stories, so we need your support. Help us by liking, sharing, and subscribing to our channel if you haven't already. You won't miss any new exciting videos. Check out the next video. You'll love it!